Hey, Warpugs. So this is the request that was made by Fellow in the Discord, and this is from Uncle Sam, and this is what if the clone army were an Imperial Guard regiment? Okay, so there's a lot to unpack with that. If the clone army were an Imperial Guard regiment, number one, it's not something the likes of which we haven't seen before in terms of, you know, what the clone army actually is. Army of clones, duh. We see that in the Kriegers all the time with the Vitae birthing wombs. So it's not like it's something that hasn't been done. But what the clone army would be able to do, that would be a different story altogether. We'd have to take a look at the world they're from, the martial culture. We know, so the easiest comparison here will be Krieg. But the martial culture of the clone army versus Krieg's martial culture is far, far different. Krieg's is death cult, sacrifice, the whole 9 yards. The clone army would be more akin to Cadia than anything else in terms of combined arms and everything else like that. And wow, there's stuff all over the shirt. I didn't even see it until just now. We're gonna check this out. Warpugs. This is the first time I've seen anything from Uncle Sam, so if you like this, be sure to go check him out. His links will be in the description below. Let's get started.
Out of all fictional militaries, there is one group that I believe would be highly effective as a regiment of the Imperial Guard in Warhammer 40,000. Before Warhammer 40k, my greatest sci-fi love was Star Wars, and the Clone Troopers will always be my favorite part of that franchise.
Okay.
And I believe that the Clone Army would be a wonderful Guard regiment and work quite well within that setting. For a bit of background, the Clone Army, or Grand Army of the Republic, was the final military the Galactic Republic would utilize before it became the Galactic Empire. Created on the planet of Kamino at the behest of Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, who at the time was being manipulated by Darth Tyrannus, more commonly known as Count Dooku, this army would remain secret even to the Jedi until the Clone Wars would break out at the Battle of Geonosis. Over the course of the Clone Wars, the Republic would fight against the Confederacy of Independent Systems in an attempt to end the Civil War and reunite the Republic. The clones would act as its elite military forces, being responsible for doing a lot of the heavy lifting at many major battle zones across the galaxy, and would be remembered as one of the greatest fighting forces in the history of the galaxy. The Clone Army is comprised of clones of Jango Fett, a legendary Mandalorian bounty hunter who was the perfect template for a soldier. They were not only well trained and equipped, but genetically engineered to follow orders and be loyal to a fault, and combined with their inherent fanaticism, you would not find a more qualified group of soldiers anywhere. This is a well-organized, very adaptable army that would be perfectly ready to take on anything the 40k universe could throw at them. Now, on the subject of Jedi, they are not at all involved in this for one specific reason. The clones were not exclusively commanded by Jedi.
True.
In fact, most of the clone army was commanded by military or navy commanders of the Republic. And these groups that were commanded by military men versus peacekeepers were not only more effective, but were more disciplined and had less casualties overall. Take the Navy Captain Jan Dodonna, this guy from A New Hope, in case you don't know who he is. He was a decorated veteran of the Stark Hyperspace War, and during the Clone Wars, he oversaw many crucial victories commanding both Navy and ground forces. So the Clone Army overall would not suffer without the use of Jedi commanders, but actually would be improved. First things first. The Clone Army, like I said before, is incredibly versatile. Think about how the Cadians are good at most things. That is how the Clone Army is most of the time, with specialist units sprinkled in for specific tasks. Plus, the Clone Army is big. 3 million strong at the beginning of the Clone Wars big. And keep in mind, most Guard regiments peak at about 900,000 troops. So 3 million soldiers ready to fight across the galaxy is a big number, even by 40k standards. The standard equipment is important to mention, because while clone armor is not designed to protect against larger projectiles and melee weapons, neither can standard flak armor for the average guardsman. The body glove underneath the suit is able to regulate temperature and be able to compress certain body parts to prevent bleeding, and the helmet overall not only improves battlefield communications, but the sensors inside give the user significant environmental awareness, something the standard equipment the Imperial Guard offers does not have. But the main benefit of clone armor is what it's designed to do when hit with, say, an energy weapon. The plastoid armor plating is designed to dispel heat, turning, say, a lethal shot from a lasgun into just knocking someone out. And speaking of lasguns, while the lasgun is an effective weapon, it does have some downsides. Lasguns, while very effective against soft targets, are very bad against armored targets. Blasters are very effective against both. This is because blasters are plasma-based, not laser-based, not only giving them enhanced armor penetration, but enhanced soft target damage as well, as the bolt, when hitting soft targets, will explode inside of the body, doing a lot of damage.
Extreme amounts of agony.
Plus, its capability to penetrate armor would make it very useful against heavily armored targets like Chaos Space Marines. If you take 10 clones armed with blasters, or even 5, and put them up against one Chaos Space Marine, it is very likely those blaster bolts will penetrate the armor, and if not outright killing the guy, it would certainly make him hurt. It's also important to note that almost all weapons in the clone army are based on blaster technology.
Now, the only issue that I have with that is I still think it would take quite a bit. Plus, with the lasgun being based, well, it's a laser, and the plasma bolt actually taking some time to fire. This would rely, the 5-to-1 context would be very, very heavily reliant on the reflexes of said Space Marine. If they were up to snuff, they're going to have a hard time hitting them.
Everything from the beam turrets on the clone gunship to starfighters to ship-mounted cannons. This means on an anti-personnel level, the clone army has a significant leg up compared to the standard regiment based on just weapons alone. In regards to specialist units, the clone army has you covered, because it has everything from flame troops, cold assault troops, or even giant suits of armor for boarding action similar to Terminators, just to name a few. But the clone special forces really shine here, as they fill a sort of role similar to that of Tempestus Scions or say Kasrkin, but in a way that those two don't really touch. The ARC Troopers, Alpha or Standard ARC Troopers, doesn't really matter, are tactically gifted one-man armies that can work as assassins, recon, commanders, or just members of elite teams for special assignments.
Okay.
The first 100 ARCs were also trained by Jango Fett himself, and are easily some of the most dangerous soldiers the galaxy had ever seen. Their influence on the clone army at large after Alpha 17 would train many of the famous clone commanders would be one of the main reasons why the clone army was so effective towards the end of the Clone Wars.
Okay.
Clone commandos would be very useful as a lightweight, highly trained special forces unit. Along with being highly versatile, the deployment style and training makes it so that they could go out on assignment for months at a time without returning back to base, making them ideal for long-range reconnaissance or specific operations that would put them in a unique spot compared to all the other Guard special forces on offer. They could even be used alongside Imperial assassins in many aspects, and honestly, I think they would work extremely well there too. The last major thing that makes them so effective on the ground is the fact that they're all the same guy. Command structure or not, the genetic inclination towards following orders and loyalty gives them almost a hive mind effect, making them work better with each other than almost any other regiment out there. Alongside this, the army has its own vehicles and ships. And while unique, they do have some ups and downs in comparison to their infantry stuff. The tanks like the TX-130 and ATTE would be comparable to the Leman Russ in some ways, and while their weapons are powerful, they would not be nearly as protective as, say, a Leman Russ in terms of armor.
Right.
But by themselves, they were...
And the profile of them, the actual profile of the Walker, the profile of that would be laughably so compared to the Leman Russ, which is laughably overwrought. I mean, the thing is a walking massive piece of equipment. It's going to get hit by everything. And that's what people say about the Leman Russ as well. And the Leman Russ is probably half that size.
Work just fine. It would work really well in a support role alongside it. Plus, the ATTE could be mounted on walls or upside down, and this would be useful for creative ambushes. But the two main clone vehicles that would give them an edge, in my opinion, would be the gunship and the turbo tank. The turbo tank has a stupid amount of armor, being able to carry up to 300 soldiers alongside several small vehicles, and has enough weapons to make a Land Raider look like a Chimera. It's also incredibly fast and be very useful in ferrying large numbers of troops in and out of war zones. And hell, I could say it could carry up to 3 to 4 squads of Space Marines if it wanted to instead. And I can honestly see a chapter like the White Scars or even the Raven Wing of the Dark Angel stealing a few of these and using them for their own efforts. It works well as an assault vehicle, a mobile base, or a wall to soak up fire. It is the most effective ground vehicle the Clone Army has and would work really well with their status as a rapid response attack force. The gunship as well would work as a significant improvement to the Valkyrie, as not only being faster, but able to carry more troops, with the Valkyrie carrying 12 and the gunship carrying 30, plus an AT-RT or a speeder bike. Combined with its heavy armament, these two vehicles, combined with its laser artillery or even standard artillery, would make the Clone Army a devastatingly fast force on the ground. In regards to spacecraft, they would do extremely well there too, with its starfighters being about the same in terms of use as standard guard ships. Their capital ships, though, leave a lot to be desired, as while an Acclamator or Venator is a good ship, compared to 40k ships, it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of defense and weapons, and most guard ships would outclass it basically in all situations. It does have the benefit of having a hyperdrive, though, making them very useful as, say, a transport ship that wouldn't have to be worried about, you know, getting swallowed by demons or something. Despite all of these upsides, the clone army does have a few downsides.
True.
Clones age at twice the rate of normal humans, meaning that despite having fast training times, there would not be many veteran old clones running around compared to, say, Yarick or Caiaphas Cain. This is something that cloners would either need to remove or Imperial medical technology could negate, but it's still important to note nonetheless. Another thing is that they could run into issues against Psykers, as they lack any form of battle Psykers within their ranks. Culturally as well, they may differ from most regiments, as being comprised of clones of the same guy would make it harder for them to relate to, say, a Krieger or a Valhallan Ice Warrior. Outside
Yeah, the Kriegers are based off different people, but they're still mostly clones.
of this, there are not many obvious downside to the clone troopers. Now, how would it fare against various factions? Well, if it's Renegade Guard, pretty even with an edge to the clones. The Renegade Guard are typically more disorganized and less disciplined than the normal counterparts,
True.
but may have special weapons or increased numbers. So it really depends on who has better footing. But in an even fight, I would say the clone troopers would win most of the time.
I'd say so
The
that
Necrons
too.
would be a very difficult enemy for them to fight, is even though the clones are well equipped, Necroderma still regenerates fast, and a blaster, despite being more powerful than a lasgun, would not be as effective as, say, a bolter or a las cannon.
Extremely
if
true.
If it's a small outbreak of Necrons, or even an almost medium-sized one, I would say the clones have a decent chance of holding their own, but if it's a situation where it's millions of Necrons with all the ancient weird stuff in tow, they'd lose immediately,
Yeah.
along with everything else. The clones would probably do pretty well against the Orcs. They'd probably do as well as...
Now, this is where I have a doubt. This one I have a doubt in, because the orcs are on a different level. Now, the orcs are just built different. Now, as far as how they will perform, I'd say they perform about as well as any guard regiment would. It's really hard to calculate performance based off anything other than them actually doing it, but it is the orcs.
most regiments that fight against them, and depending on their numbers or how caught off guard they are. Now, if it's an ungodly amount of orcs, then they would just lose, but I'd say most of the time they do pretty well against them. They would most likely lose to Chaos Demons. Most regiments lose pretty bad to demons or anything warp-related. They could at best hold the line, but not every regiment is the Armageddon Steel Legion fighting Angron during the First War for Armageddon, and even then they had help from the Grey Knights. Most likely the clones are going to lose, and lose pretty bad. Chaos Space Marines is interesting because it depends on a few things. Most Guard regiments do well against Chaos Space Marines, but that's if it's like the Black Legion or Red Corsairs. When it comes down to the more Chaos-devoted ones, this is where the Guard tends to falter a little bit. Khorne Berserkers in limited numbers might be able to be dealt with, but if it's an ungodly amount, or God forbid Karn is present, I'm sorry, they're probably going to lose pretty bad. The Death Guard would be a nightmare for them to handle.
Very much so.
And the Thousand Sons would probably make mincemeat out of them, as Chaos Sorcerers are a nightmare to deal with even without demon support. And the Emperor's Children, when actually organized, would be terrifying and make mincemeat out of the clone troopers. Don't even get me started on the Alpha Legion either. That's not even fair. Really, it just depends on luck and how well equipped they are, and whether or not they have help, because if they don't have any help, they're probably going to be hurting pretty bad. Tyranids and Gene Stealers would be similar to Necrons. If they can contain them, they would win, or potentially hold them off long enough to get help. But if a high fleet shows up, it's game over. The Eldar...
I actually would, for the Tyranids and for the way the clones do warfare, I would actually lean more in the favor of the clones than the Tyranids, if judging based off numbers. Now, of course, if you're sitting there saying you dump 10 billion Tyranids on a planet, they're going to lose, of course. But with comparable army sizes, I would lean towards the clones. I really would.
Would be a royal pain for them. The Eldar are incredibly strong, and despite their empire being in shambles, that does not mean an aspect warrior is any less dangerous. The clones could hold them off, but they'd probably need some help. Same thing with the Dark Eldar, except that it'd probably be worse since the Dark Eldar don't fight with the same loose sense of honor the Eldar have, and they fight really dirty and would probably hurt the clones a lot. But if the clones outnumber them, then it could be a more even fight overall. But in general, the clones are going to need some help when dealing with the Eldar. The Tau would be interesting because the Tau are highly unique compared to everything else that they've fought. The Tau fight at range and act more like standard soldiers than raving fanatics or wizards. So in theory, the fight would be pretty even. At range, the Tau would dominate. But in close range, I'd say it'd be a pretty even fight and probably be a toss-up most of the time. The Leagues of Votann are incredibly tough and would prove to give the clone army a decent amount of trouble. While they don't have warp stuff, they have significantly more powerful technology and greater numbers, so I really do think it depends on positioning and overall who the commander is and what other factors are present. But in a stand-up fight between the two, I'd say the Votann would probably win. So overall, I think the clone army would be a pretty good fit as an Imperial Guard regiment. It would be cut above the rest best in some areas and work really well as a general purpose rapid assault force. They may not work the best with, say, other regiments, but overall, I think if they needed to do what they need to do, they'd probably be able to fall in line. This video was a fun experiment and something I'd like to do more of in the future. If you have any factions you'd like to see at 40k and see me discuss, please put your suggestions down in the comments. And if you'd like to learn more about clone troopers, watch the Clone Wars show, both of them, or play Republic Commando, or read the Republic Commando books. Star Wars is really popular, so you have a lot of different things to pick from, and nothing is really a wrong answer. Thank you all very much for watching. If you want to support the channel, please consider becoming a member. And thank you very much to the channel members for supporting the channel. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a great night.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So I have a little bit of a different view on the weaponry that the clones would be using. The blasters in and of themselves. The lasgun is, in my estimation, a superior weapon to fight pretty much anything. But when you do have the blaster, because it's plasma based, they're going to hold out far better against certain enemies than the guard would. I mean, and that's just a fact. They're going to utterly paste any revolt that comes against them. And the reason is the clone troopers are highly, highly disciplined. But when it comes to certain ones, namely the orcs, they don't put down near the absolute hell torrent of fire that the lasgun is capable of. And even though it takes a couple of shots to bring down an orc from a lasgun, they're going to be able to put those shots down range very, very quickly. Now, on the other hand, I think that the clone troopers would do better against the Tyranids than the standard guard would, just because of the weaponry they have. And I think they would... He says they would get dominated in long range against the Tau. I'm really not sure that would be the case. I'm really not sure that would be the case. It would be worth seeing. Because the clone troopers didn't have the genetic deformity that made them miss every shot. I'm just saying. So, they did effectively well. Warpugs, I'm going to jump up out of here. This was really good. I enjoyed this little thought experiment. So again, this was Uncle Sam. I'm going to have all of his links in the description down below. I highly recommend that you check him out. I will catch you guys next time, and, well, this makes me think a couple of more videos that I really want to do. Until next time, Warpugs, you guys have a good day.